welcome to the segment. It's a great honour today to have Mr. Quentin Kilian here. He is the CEO of the REINT, which is the Real Estate Institute of the Northern Territory. Great man, long-time Territorian. As I have learned, he came to the Territory in 1968, was a paperboy just here in Stewart Park, so that's as old as me. So, mate, he's a great man. He's got an incredible story to tell. God forbid we try and get through his resume, but welcome to the show. It's great to have you here, mate.
It's lovely to be here, Chris.
I've got to declare I have had a beer with this young man, so I've
one or three.
I've dragged him in here. So if you can, in 30 seconds, I don't know if you can, give me a snapshot of your experience.
All right, snapshot is grew up in the Territory, did all my schooling here, here in Darwin and in Katherine. Worked in numerous jobs after school. Started in radio back in the late 70s, I think DJing at most of the nightclubs around town. Did a radio gig for about 10 years around Australia. Went to Hong Kong, lived there right up until the handover, and did jobs like work for Star TV and ran the Australian Chamber of Commerce there.
Yep.
Across to Singapore where I ran a TV network, moved back to Sydney, worked for a satellite industry where I covered Asia Pacific, moved back here to Darwin and took up a job in government running Asian relations and international trade, and then the last 11 years I've been the CEO of the Real Estate Institute.
So the exciting for me is we're talking about business, and
Yep.
you're right in the middle of this. So tell me, is there any trends? I mean, everyone, it comes to real estate, everyone's got an opinion, but is there any trends in the Northern Territory that do we either follow down south, or is that all changed, or is there anything that you can bank on in trend-wise in the Northern Territory?
Look, the one thing you could bank on is that longer term, real estate investments are going to be much better, much more profitable than, say, stock market investments. That's a proven, that's an absolute. But you're talking here 10-year, 20-year investment cycles. If you're willing to sit it out on that, yes, you will make money in real estate in selling your property. But as far as other trends go, no, they've sort of all moved over the years. Where we used to have a trend that we all sort of followed the southern market, as that dropped off, we started to pick up. That all seems to have dissipated over the last few years. The biggest problem we've got here is that our whole economy is underpinned by projects. And so we get peaks and troughs in the economy. And with those peaks and troughs in the economy come peaks and troughs in the population. And the population is the key element to real estate. We must have a population growth in order to keep that balance between supply and demand. And so if we get peaks and then troughs, big troughs in our population, we suddenly get this imbalance between supply and demand. We get far too much supply and little demand.
Yep.
Whereas the peak in that scenario brings the opposite. It brings this massive demand and an undersupply, which then pushes prices up. So unfortunately, until we get an economy that is less dependent upon projects and therefore less susceptible to those peaks and troughs in it, then we're not going to get a nice flat ergonomic growth in the marketplace.
Tell me this, there's a report, and don't quote me, but it was in Southern Papers last week talking about waiting in September or October, pricing or house real estate is going to crash another 30%.
Yeah.
Real?
No, nonsense.
Nonsense.
I mean, the figure was 32%. It was being bandied around by the Combank and a few other people.
Yep.
It's East Coast centric. I mean, the thing that frustrates me is that the likes of the Australian and the Fin Review and even the federal government talk about the Australian housing market. The Australian housing market doesn't exist. Every single state, every single jurisdiction, even within a jurisdiction, there's a big difference between, say, Darwin's housing market and Katherine's housing market. So there is no one Australian housing market. So to put this ubiquitous figure on the market and say it's going to crash by 32% is a nonsense. Sydney and Melbourne might be affected by that, but even then, Melbourne is starting to show a trend against that prediction. Yeah. So to make those outlandish predictions is nonsense, absolute nonsense.
Yeah. So for me, and again, novice, not my industry, but my understanding currently, our house, it was before COVID-19 came in, we were either 25, 30% down already.
Well, prior to COVID-19, we'd taken the best part of 10 years off your capital growth. Yeah. So our housing prices, our median price had already shifted back 10 years, right, prior to COVID-19. Interestingly, however, during the COVID-19 period, we've actually seen buyer activity increase and we've seen rental activity increase. So we're likely, if anything, to come out of COVID-19 with a slightly better market than we went into it with.
So tell me this, I remember late last year, it was a very vocal topic in the NT News, and it had to do with landlords losing the right to make decisions on whether tenants could have pets.
Yep.
Were you involved in that?
Absolutely. We've led the charge on that from day one.
Yep. And
in actual fact, the REINT was responsible for mounting a petition that got 8,500 signatures, not just from the NT, but from around the world, from investors that were annoyed with it. You're quite right. The legislation that they've brought in is called the pet legislation. It's actually amendments to the Residential Tenancies Act. But we refer to it as the removal of landlords' rights, because essentially what it does is it flips the onus from the landlord having the decision about a pet to the landlord having to defend a decision not to have a pet, where the tenant gets to make that decision. I want a llama in the living room. Landlord says no. The landlord then has to take it to the tribunal and make an argument, and the tribunal can actually decide whether or not the landlord has to live with the tenant having a llama in the living room, which is a nonsense, because why, as an investor, why would you choose to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into a brand new property and potentially have tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage done to, say, polished wooden floors, when in the past you could have said no? Now you have to be reliant on somebody else saying no.
Yeah, so that's, well, I mean, I was thinking about bringing my pigeon coop and breeding my pigeons in the lounge room, but I see your point, and I guess it comes to I guess the Northern Territory is desperate to attract investors to the Northern Territory, and this would go right against the grain.
Oh, absolutely. We've already had letters from Southern investors that have said we're not going to invest in the Territory.
All right.
Right, because of that exact rule.
All right, so we're not going to get on our what do they call it, soapbox. We're not going to get on the soapbox. But listen, also while we got you, can you offer any advice? And it's not really. Could you offer any advice to local business that obviously all industry has been decimated by COVID, so we're all struggling to find our feet, and we've also got, for us in the Northern Territory, a wet season coming. So once I guess the JobKeeper and those stimulus packages dry up, we've then got the harsh reality of having our wet season.
Yep.
Have you got any advice for local business? Do they sit on their fingers? Do they hold on to them? What do they do?
I'd be using this time as a chance to basically wipe the slate clean in your business planning. And instead of looking at doing the same as what you did pre-COVID, and saying, can we do that again, is actually look at it and say, how can we reinvent ourselves? How can we redefine what we do? Is it the same thing but done slightly differently? Is it something different? Is it an adjunct to what we do? Use this opportunity while you're regrowing your business or trying to reinvent it, to actually do that. Reinvent your business. Take those challenges and say, well, if we invested a little bit over here, we could go in that direction. Don't tie yourself entirely to something like tourism, for instance, where there is always that risk that it's going to, again, are we going to have a good tourism season? Therefore, is my business going to fail? Have a look at where could I go? What areas could I expand? What have I always wanted to do?
Yeah.
I, as a business person, I've always wanted to have a go at that. Well, now do it.
Yeah.
Be that brave.
So what gets Quentin in what I would have thought would be quite a corporate role, sitting behind a desk, board meetings, industry? Obviously, you're a fired up, passionate guy. You have to be a DJ. So what gets you going in the morning? What gets you out of bed?
Innovative thinkers, innovative challenging thinkers, people who think outside of the box and do things differently, and people who are willing to challenge the norm rather than simply saying, this is Darwin and this is how we've always done it and this is how we should do it. No, break that norm. That's what I want to see. I want to see big picture thinking. I want to see blue sky thought and people who challenge those, the concept of reinvention.
Yeah.
You know, I've reinvented my career all the way along because I wanted to do something different each time.
Yep.
I didn't want to do the same thing over and over again. And that's what business should be about, is yes, we can have these things, but let's reinvent it. Let's do it a little bit differently. Let's do something. Let's challenge that normal. That's what gets me out of bed each day is how can I make what I do in the real estate industry just that little bit different? What can I do? Can I add something new? Can I find a new piece of technology that changes the way people look at things?
What are your thoughts on, and just coming onto a local level, what are your thoughts on the whole concept of a new CDU campus in the city?
Oh, I applaud it. I think it's the most brilliant concept we've had in a long time. If you look at cities like San Francisco, one of my favourite cities, or Auckland, they have inner city campuses, and the activity that it creates. Now, the argument, of course, is that they're students and they don't have a lot of money. Each individual one probably doesn't, but collectively they do, right? And they also generate activity like coffee shops, like nightclubs, like clothing shops, right? Which then attracts other people who are not students but want to live in that environment. So they start taking up private rentals in the city or private purchases and this. And all of a sudden you have this city centre that is buzzing with activity. That, to me, is what this campus will do.
Yeah, I think you're right. One of the great things, you know, if you can say one of the great things, one of the things that we've never had is time. And for the first time, we've had time.
Yep.
And I saw there was a bit of an uproar locally. The gents that own and run Throb nightclub came up with a proposal to do something out at East Point. And on a local level, there was a lot of commentary around it, and I wanted to applaud them and go, fantastic for thinking outside the box, whether right, wrong, reserve, not reserve. I just was like, innovative thinking, great, we're trying something new.
At least you're doing something. At least you're challenging the norm and saying now whether or not it's the right idea, whether or not it's a great idea, I'm not willing to make a position on that. But what I am saying is exactly the same as you. At least you're challenging that 100%. Normal and you're having a go at thinking outside the box. Now, perhaps you have, now that we've thought of the original idea, maybe it has to go in a different direction, or maybe it has to be pared back, or maybe it has to change the colour scheme you're using. Who knows? But at least you've got a starting point that is outside of that box.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, coming back to also, I remember you talking to me about I'm not sure if it's recently, but you were up at the mall and a German ship or a ship came in and all our shops were closed in the mall.
Well, and the shops were open, but there was nothing there in German, right? There was nothing that attracted them. There was no street entertainment. We didn't have any Aboriginal painters or dancers there, which didn't have any buskers. So you literally had a very quiet mall, and it was a lovely quiet mall, because nobody was there doing anything. But something as simple as putting out signs that said in German, come in here and buy a T-shirt, come in here and have morning tea. Having people who spoke German with T-shirts on saying, I'm a tour guide, talk to me. We missed a golden opportunity there to tap into a market that we knew was coming to town. Right? We knew it. It didn't just arrive and we went, heck, there's a boatload of Germans have arrived. It's all there, and we're missing these marketing opportunities. Yeah. We've missed, for the last 3 years, we've missed the chance, as you say, to have that time to reinvent our city. Instead of sitting around and thinking, what have we done wrong? We should have gone, it's happened. Let's use this chance to reinvent the city. Not just little bits of it, let's reinvent the whole city.
Yeah, no, you're a great innovator. I'm pretty fired up now. I was feeling quite flat before, but I feel like I need to go and do some push-ups or something.
Look,
but thank you.
People are talking in doom and gloom all the time about, yes, it is a hard time, and yes, we've had a dreadful economic situation and some very abysmal management from certain people in this city making decisions on our behalf. But let's not let that drag us down. we need to be the innovators in business. We need to be saying, well, let's use this time to recreate, to re-innovate, to reinvigorate, right, by using big picture, big thinking ideas.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited, mate. Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Wealth of experience, wealth of knowledge, and we will have to have maybe possibly just one more beer.
Yes, or a glass of red.
Oh, no, we're not allowed to do that now. Thank you, mate.
My pleasure.